So I just want you all to know a little bit about how this came about. As you know, I'm a member of Gas Leaks. I attend Gas Leaks Allies, which is a regional meeting of people from different communities. I think there are about 15 communities. Is that right, Audrey? Do you know the number?
You mean the multi-town initiative?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think there's like 25 different,
So it's grown.
yeah.
Um, and it's sponsored by a number of nonprofit organizations. I represent Brookline. Other people are representing other towns. We also, Susan Helms Daly from Mothers Out Front also represents Brookline. So our last couple of meetings have been very interesting. Audrey made a presentation about the National Grid pilot program on what they're calling geothermal micro districts. And it's a very interesting concept of, well, she'll tell you about it, but I thought we all would want to know. National Grid we just found out, has just submitted the pilot. So we don't know when they'll hear from DPU and actually get it. But I think it's good to be prepared. I think it's something that could work in Brookline. And so with no further ado, I'll introduce Audrey Schulman from HEAT, that's spelled H-E-E-T, who is very interested in working very hard on gas leaks.
Okay, so I'll do a short presentation because I like to work with, I'm a visual learner. So heat's been around for a while. We cut carbon emissions by driving systems change. We don't take money from industry, including gas industry or geothermal industry. As you probably all well know, in Massachusetts area, and particularly in National Grid area, there's a lot of aging gas infrastructure. Here's a detail of a National Grid map showing two pipes in Back Bay dating back to the 1800s that are still in use. So you can imagine pipes that old are going to leak. And they're also, there's a safety concern. So the gas utilities have a 20-year plan to replace all of the aging leak-prone pipes. Here are just 5 years of utility reported work sites. And the total cost of this will be greater than the depreciated value of the system in the ground. So they're going to pump a lot of money into this system, and it's a fossil fuel system. And we know in Massachusetts, we will not, because of our state mandated emissions requirements, we will not be using gas past 2050. So this approximately $17 billion worth of cost will likely be stranded assets. So once I learned about this, I began, heat, we began to think about how to, what else could go in that would be infrastructure that might be well used instead of wasted. And one potential, the whole idea is to move buildings towards electricity and then produce that electricity with renewables. One way to do that efficiently is air source heat pumps. The problem is those are most inefficient when you need them most, when the temperature is most extreme, on heat waves, when it's incredibly cold. And so that's not great. The second problem is that you generally have to have discretionary income to afford this. And so not everybody can afford it. And a third, it requires the collapse of the gas industry with all those gas workers. And as it goes downhill, probably the remaining people will be those who cannot afford new heating systems. So it's probably going to go on the backs of the low income, which is something we all want to avoid. So a second option instead of air source heat pumps is ground source heat pumps. And those are fabulous because the ground is always the same temperature, even when it's incredibly cold or hot outside. And therefore the heat pumps can continue to work efficiently no matter what the weather. So it's a smaller burden on the electric grid. but there still, if anything, is a bigger inequity of access because it costs a lot more to install ground source heat pumps. And this definitely would require the collapse of the gas industry if we all moved to these single installations. So instead, we've proposed district ground source heat pumps, or geothermal, and we call this concept a GeoMicro district. It would be installed by the gas company in its right-of-way in the street, with, sort of mirroring the gas infrastructure with a pipe going down the street, with service lines going to each building. The differences are that it would have boreholes that would go about 500 feet or less in the ground, and that it would contain water, just plain ambient temperature water, rather than gas, an explosive substance. It could be installed around any infrastructure that you want, that's already pre-existing in the street. And the great, one of the many great things about installing it this way is that then the gas companies do what they always do, which is install the infrastructure and and spread the cost across all of us and over decades. So it's not too painful to any one person. This system has a variety of lovely synergies. For instance, if a supermarket is pulling cold off the system for its fridges, then it would be returning that water hotter back into that shared loop, which means that that extra heat could heat buildings down the street. The second thing is, during the summer, when you have a lot of excess heat, you can store that heat in the ground to be used later in the winter when you need it. So we came up with this concept and wanted to find if it would work in Massachusetts. So we hired Burrow-Happold Engineering, which is a company that did New York City's 80 by 50 plan and many other illustrious things. They did a statewide feasibility study, and they did it by creating sort of prototypical neighborhoods that you find in Massachusetts on gas infrastructure, and then figuring out how much energy use each of these street segments would use. And then if they could actually get that amount of energy from this GeoMicro district. And they found for the top 3 street segments that you see there, everything from somewhat, suburban to, medium density, mixed energy use streets, you get, almost 100% of all the heating and cooling that you need. The only one that you would not be able to get enough from the way they did this is the really, the high density mixed use things that you find in like Central Square, where, or downtown Boston. And in those circumstances, what you do is you make the boreholes deeper than 500 feet, or you'd put them in parking lots, or you'd ship some of the excess energy from the other street segments into the city. For instance, you see in that top most suburban street segment that there'd be an excess of cold created by that kind of street segment. So you could move that into the city. And the other one has an excess of heat. You'd move that into the city to help meet its needs. So what we'd like to do is pilot this on some street segment and back the gas infrastructure up out of the street and use the gas as a sort of emergency heater just in case. That would reassure everybody that they know they will get heat no matter what. And then iterate on the system each time, backing the gas up out of those street segments and connecting each of the GeoMicro districts to make a geogrid that can share, that they interconnect like Lego pieces. And then iterate again until the only gas you'd have would be in the very densest part of the cities, or where you have industrial processes. This is the scale that biogas might be able to reach. Once we came up with the concept, we looked around to find out if there were any possible case studies that might show that this could work. And we found a few of them. One of the best is at Colorado Mesa University. They installed 4 different GeoMicro districts over time, interconnecting them. And they have gas heaters on the system, but they have not had to turn them on, aside from to check that the boiler still works, in 8 years. They're saving over $1 million a year in energy bills. So what the benefits of the system would be many. I'll name just a few of them. One is that there would be lower energy bills. And we know that not only from the Colorado Mesa University study, but also because it makes sense. With natural gas, you have to import fuel from out of state. In this, you have to build the infrastructure, but you don't have to import any fuel for it. Secondly, there would be lower emissions. Because of the way electricity in Massachusetts is produced, the emissions would be reduced 60% immediately. And over time, as the electric grid sourced its energy more and more from renewables, it would go down to almost 0. It would be a safer system because there would not be an explosive gas in those pipes. And for Merrimack Valley, we know what that means. Finally, it would flatten the electric peak. So because ground source heat pumps are so efficient all the time, they would, in comparison to air source heat pumps, they'd be a much more efficient way of heating and cooling all of those buildings. And this is a graph from Colorado Mesa University. As it expanded in size, almost 50%, its electric use stayed very, the peak was pretty much the same, to the point that Xcel Energy, which is their energy provider, called them up and showed them this graph and said, "What are you doing?" And so this would allow, this flattening the electric peak would allow us all to move towards renewable electricity faster. So there are some pilots approved now. HEAT has managed to talk Eversource into suggesting to pilot, and the DPU, the Department of Public Utilities, has approved it. The deal is Eversource will install, own, and maintain the infrastructure in the street. They will pay for heat pumps and efficiency in the buildings. Residences will have to pay just $20 a month. $5 a month if you're low income. And the commercial energy bills are not yet determined, but should be low. If you know of any site, please tell me. They're looking for something in the original Eversource gas territory. They want around 100 homes on the same street segment, and a mix of new and existing buildings possibly, certainly with different energy use. It'll be installed this summer, and it'll be turned on this fall. There's also a pilot approved in the Merrimack Valley, in the area that was affected by the natural gas disaster. It will be paid by the Columbia Gas sale. It's a competitive grant run by the Attorney General's Office and the Department of Energy Resources, and anybody can do this to install, own, and operate this system. It does not need to be run by a utility. Finally, the part that you probably all will care about most is the National Grid request was filed last week. It is for $15.6 million to do geothermal, networked geothermal. They assume that it'll be between 100 and 200 units, both businesses and homes. They will install, own, and maintain the infrastructure in the street. They want to focus on replacing leak-prone gas infrastructure with geothermal. and they want to work with low-income and environmental justice communities. And they want to reduce potentially the investment in areas with gas constraints. They will pay for the heat pumps in the buildings. They want the customers, the residential customers, to pay $150 per month for 2 years. And they want low income to pay, $112 per month for 2 years, and commercial $225. And they want customers to pay for all the new appliances, any other new appliances they might need aside from the heat pumps to replace gas appliances.
After this meeting, Audrey emailed 2 corrections to her presentation about National Grid's request. They will also pay up to $5,000 per unit for efficiency and retrofits, and new electric appliances to replace the gas appliances in the units.
And I'll just say at this point, if you have any suggestions or problems with this, you can send a comment letter into the DPU. So if those prices, for instance, seem a wee bit high, or anything about this deal seems bad, the Department of Public Utilities will be taking comment letters. And I can help you do that if you want. Finally, we have a series of charrettes, monthly charrettes, in order to make sure that these pilots are done well. And if you would like to join them, they are once a month. I think the 3rd Wednesday of the month from 2 to 4. And we work with all stakeholders to figure out what the potential problems might be and find the answers, all of us together. If you want to join, email us at info@heat.org. Or if you have any other thoughts about this. I'd like you to imagine, just to end this, as this is a map of the gas infrastructure. Just imagine it over time, gradually changing, turning to a geothermal grid, using less and less emissions, until gradually it's all renewable, local, cheaper energy that's safer. Everything we do is open sharing and adapted under Creative Commons. So just refer it back to us. And here are some resources and references. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Fascinating and very, very concise. Lots of ideas in there.
I have a couple of questions.
Yep.
Well, I probably have the advantage because I've thought about this for a couple of weeks since you made your presentation at the Gas Leaks Allies. Well, one is if the pipes are cast iron and you're putting, instead of gas, you're putting water through them, what's the chance that they're going to rust out sooner?
So probably most of the pipes will have to be replaced, and they'll be replaced with plastic, HDPE. It's the same stuff that they're replacing the gas infrastructure with now. In some cases, like larger diameter cast iron might be able to be reused, in which case it would be sleeved with a plastic liner and used that way. So the rust would not be a problem.
The other question I have is that the national, we hadn't seen these numbers before because when we met this last week in the Gas Leaks Allies, the presenters didn't have the actual number. They seem a lot higher than Eversource.
Yes, that would be true.
Do you know?
Sorry?
Do you know what the explanation for that is?
I do not know. I am going to be asking. I thoroughly encourage everybody to, if they think that those prices might be high, to suggest send in comment letters. I think specifically and especially for low income, if that's what they want to work with, those prices are way too high. That's not a way to work with EJ.
Right.
Yeah, I've got a question. The prices it was a fixed price per month.
Yeah.
Different houses or different sizes would you be using different amounts of heat? Why does everybody pay the same?
So this is a fixed price for the pilot or pilots. Both Eversource and National Grid had fixed prices. And so I think they don't know quite yet how to cost it out, because it's unclear. Meters for BTUs, British thermal units of energy going in and out, are very expensive and not that accurate. So it's a technical problem, and they haven't figured that part out yet.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the National Grid pilot. Didn't say anything about improving efficiency in the buildings, but the other one did. So that would be my complaint, that they're going to reformulate the energy system, but they're not going to help with efficiency.
Yeah, that's probably my mistake in the presentation. I should have put that in. I think they
Okay.
suggested that they were going to do, if I remember correctly, and I read it briskly at night, they were going to do energy efficiency through Mass Save.
Okay, so I mean, we're sitting here, Alan and I, as condo trustees, wondering how the heck does this apply to a condominium? But
Yeah.
so I'm assuming it's electricity that's coming in the building, and therefore we would have to pretty much do everything internally to our entire condo building.
So it would connect to your distribution system, however you distribute heating and cooling in your house, in your building.
Yeah, it's hot water right now.
Okay. So then you'd have a water source heat pump, and you'd only be able to pull heating off because you can't deliver cooling through radiators. If you wanted to get the cooling, you'd have to add either mini splits, which are small, little heads in your, or you'd have to do vents, which would probably be exorbitantly expensive. I think Michael was next.
Yes. So are you envisioning during the pilot, would that be a complete conversion, or would it be a hybrid solution where you'd have some gas and some of the hydrothermal?
Yeah, so, and let me make clear, I do not work for the utilities. So I am constantly just interpreting what I know, right? And it would not be me or heat installing the thing. I think the way Eversource is suggesting it, they would have backup heating and cooling in every unit just in case. And I believe the way Eversource is National Grid is suggesting it, they would have, I think I saw heating and cooling on the shared loop. So the energy coming in would be through a heat pump, which is a system somewhat like a fridge, which can run forward or backwards, pumping heat into your building or out of your building.
So for example, I have a home, a single family home, and there's gas. So if I were to partake in this, then the gas would be shut off and I would get water instead. It would just be a total change. It wouldn't be a little gas, a little water. It'd be one or the other.
I believe what they're going to try for is a total change, and
Okay.
it might, and they weren't being totally pushy in it. They were saying wherever possible, if they can, they would switch out all the appliances to make them electric appliances.
Okay.
Alan?
Yeah, I'd like to go back to Linda's point, and it's something you said, Audrey. For example, large apartment buildings and condominiums. Okay, obviously radiators aren't going to work, but what we have, for example, in our condo, and a lot of places have this, we've got water source heat pumps in the units, and then we have a cooling tower, and we have boilers to provide water at appropriate temperature in summer and winter.
Domestic hot water, you mean?
No. For example, there's a company called Whalen in Massachusetts. These are in hotels, all over. They're heat pumps, and it's a unit that has a heat pump, and it has a circulating air fan. So in the unit, what I have coming in for heating and cooling my unit is air, warm or cold, as it be. But the device that's in the wall underneath the fan is actually a water source heat pump.
Okay.
We provide the water at an appropriate temperature, either from a boiler in the winter or from cooling towers in the summer. You could simply switch over and use water from your microwave whatever you call the microsystem, and that would be the water supply for those heat pumps. The biggest company manufacturing these is called Whalen, WHALEN. They're in the eastern shore of Massachusetts, of Maryland. There are a lot of other companies as well, but I mean that's not. I mean, I had been thinking in the future. I mean, we're going to have to replace our gas boilers, and unfortunately, that's what we'll have to do. But I had been thinking about possibly using air source air to water heat pumps. But something like this would work as well. We would simply have to bring in the water pipes.
Yep.
The other, and if I could, just one other question. In the beginning of your presentation, I thought you said something about one. I understand the disadvantages of the air source heat pumps in terms of energy usage, summer to winter, and that sort of stuff. But you mentioned, I thought you talked about the expense of the equipment itself, and how that would affect certainly low income people. But I mean, I would imagine the cost of a water source heat pump is similar to, probably more expensive. I mean, these Whalen units, wholesale price for one of these is just for the refrigeration chassis is a couple of $1,000s.
Right. So what we working with the Gas Lake Allies, which is a coalition of over 20 different nonprofits, we've suggested some legislation which would allow the gas companies to basically own and install the heat pumps in the building and maintain them. And also through securitization, which is a fancy method of getting money at a lower cost, they would be able to take the cost savings and apply them to low-income transition, as well as gas workers retraining.
Okay.
So we hope that way we can make it something that.
And then the final thing is, you know, the BTU meters. I don't know how precise you have to be. We used to put BTU meters on water system for chemical reactors all the time, and it's really not that complicated. It's not going to be as precise as a gas meter, but I question how precise these have to be.
Yeah, I think it has to be somewhat precise. That's one of the problems. But in any case, they're not quite sure how to bill it yet best. Was there, Werner, yes, a question?
Yeah, what I'm curious about is, so these pilots tend to be on the scale of 100 housing units. How do you get the buy-in? I mean, does that I can picture streets where a lot of people go, gee, I don't want to try this. And how do you get enough people to buy in? Or do you make sure, does everybody have to buy in?
So, you know, the site for Eversource has not yet been selected, but one of the ways to do it is to do it either with a building that is just having a retrofit done, so that has, you know, single decision maker, multi-unit, or potentially a new development. Or what we wanted to do was to basically run a competition that would be statewide for whatever street segment signed up a certain percentage of its customers, the people on the street, that street would win the system. But Eversource was a little uncomfortable with that one, so they didn't go for it. If one person on a street of 100 says no, then it's possible that the gas infrastructure is maintained for that one customer, because I don't think Eversource is going to take out the gas infrastructure until they know the system works. Does that make sense?
Sort of. I still don't see, it would seem like it makes a lot of sense if you're just talking about a big building, but then that's pretty easy. If you're talking about new development, it certainly makes sense. But it just strikes me that it might be quite hard to find a neighborhood where you get a critical mass of people that are willing to try something that's new.
Yeah, I think we've got Kathleen on the call. She could get a mass of houses like that, I think. Through Mothers Out Front, possibly.
Thanks for that vote of confidence.
Yeah.
I suggested Hancock Village.
There you go. I think it's, we'll have to find out how hard it is.
And I'll just say that Andy Martineau is one of our attendees, and he works for the company that owns Hancock Village. When you were talking about environmental justice communities, I was also thinking Village Way, it's one owner. They're interested over time in that becoming mixed income, but right now I believe it is all still different levels of income restricted apartments and townhomes. But I guess my question is, can you give a little bit more, would that be an ideal site? Can you just give a little bit more other than 100 units, like
Oh,
the
so you want,
size of the site, yeah.
you want mixed energy use, and this is for Eversource, but it'll also be true for National Grid. In order to get the greatest efficiency from the system, you want to have, like a hockey rink or a supermarket or an office building that's constantly pulling a lot of cold and putting heat back into the system for the homes down the street. So you want to have homes and you want to have some other energy use to be able to get the greatest efficiency and to make the system as balanced and low energy as possible, low energy needs as possible, I guess. Nancy, does that make sense, Kara? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out, is a hotel gonna share? Just, can you give me like a very specific example of where that would make sense, or the property owners would do that?
Okay, so for instance, on Highland Ave in Somerville, there's an apartment building and almost across the street, there's a YMCA with low income residents in it, a pool, some, sports facilities, etc. And the street is having sewer separation. So that street sewer separation, just pulling the paving up is 60% of the cost, and just putting the paving back down. So like that would reduce the cost a lot. Does that give you one? That's one cost. Yeah, okay.
Super helpful. And is it on the end of the kind of fractal, like you're showing diagrammatically, or is that not necessary for the pilot?
Oh, you mean sort of at the end of the gas tree?
Yeah.
It could be the end of the gas tree. It could like a cul-de-sac. It could be a branch between two different streets. It could be on a main road, so long as they don't want to take out the gas infrastructure, because otherwise down the street they might run out of gas.
Okay.
Nancy and then Deborah. Yep.
So one of the places that in Brookline that I thought of was the area around Beacon and Pleasant. Waldo Durgan has not yet even started the building of a hotel and residences. And just, a block maybe further in toward Com Ave, there's a Brookline Housing Authority elderly building. And across the street from that is our municipal library. So there's and the Waldo Durgan site is supposed to be a hotel, residences, some mixed commercial use, that kind of stuff. So I was thinking and I actually had called Mark Levin of Chestnut Hill Realty and left him a message about this meeting, but I see that Andy is here, Andy Martineau. So maybe he's coming as a result of that call. I don't know, or maybe Kara called him. At any rate, I think that could be an interesting site in Brookline, but it's a ways away, correct? National Grid has just submitted its pilot. So what would you estimate? How long did it take to Eversource to get their approval?
It generally takes about 11 months to get an approval from the Department of Public Utilities. And in this case, National Grid has requested that they get, approval or whatever, some sort of verdict by September.
What about like the Colonel Floyd housing that's going up by the Stop and Shop?
I think the timing is probably not correct, Kathleen, because I think they're going to be, breaking ground sooner than that.
Are they?
No, maybe I'm wrong, but yeah. Anyway, I think Deborah was next.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You're muted, Deborah.
Sorry about that. I just have one question involved because I think this is a great concept. Doesn't it depend on the soil conditions? Because I was involved in a project where we actually did a geothermal study and we couldn't do it because we had too much clay and too much heat built up in the summer that you couldn't make up for in the winter. So wouldn't some soil studies have to be done on picking the sites?
It's a great question. There would always have to be hydrology and geology studies done on the site, but using statewide data on geology, everywhere except for on the Cape, bedrock, which has the greatest thermal transfer ratios, can be reached on average within 30 feet. And that's as I remember it. So that means that it's pretty even across the state. And because we're doing something where we're not going for, when you do a single install of geothermal, you need to optimize for the very worst load all year. For that New Year's Eve, when your great aunt from Brazil is visiting and she wants the heat to 95. Instead, if you do balanced load, where you're having that hockey rink or refrigerated warehouse heat the homes down the street, and you want to balance all the way through the year, you can reduce the borehole depth and need quite considerably through that, if that makes sense. And that reduces.
Yeah, I would say that suburban areas like South Brookline are probably not ideal because they're not going to have that balance, and that you really do need the mixed neighborhoods.
Yes, you want the mixed energy use for the first few sort of seed sites. And then once you get that sort of balance on those seed sites, you can start growing out from there. What we basically want to do is grow new systems in a sort of biomimicry kind of way, if that makes sense. Alan, did you have a question?
Well, you just answered it. I assumed that the answer was that as you grow and you had a larger, more diverse areas, that you get the balance. So.
Yes, and the whole thing is the idea that the utilities gradually become thermal management companies, where their job is basically to move the heating and cooling around and keep it balanced all year round.
Is that the reason you right now, even though these are smaller areas, you want to get areas that have the balance to prove the concept? Is that it?
It's to both prove the concept and because it's the easiest to do then. If you get the balance condition at the start, then you can add more stuff to it. It's already somewhat balanced.
All right, well, thank you. Sounds like, I don't think there are any more questions. Any more questions?
Any of the participants have their hands where there are 10 people on the participant list.
Yeah, I see one
Andy
hand
Martineau
raised.
actually has his hand raised.
Yep, hold on.
How are
Could
you?
promote him?
Yep. Hi, Andy, you should be able to speak now.
Hey, everybody. How's it going? So just
Well,
a
Andy,
question.
how are you?
Good, thanks. Just trying to understand the selection criteria, and I think some of the Q&A has helped with that. In the presentation, it was talking about how, the ideal number of units is somewhere between 100 and 200. And so just thinking about, how that criteria might apply to, say, a Coolidge Corner micro district, where the Waldo Durgan site, which you heard a little bit about, we have a mixed use development that we're preparing to start the permitting process on. That's 100 something odd units and 200 key hotel rooms. So we would max out the criteria just with that site alone. So is that a flexible number, or is that something that is, just they threw a dart at the board and said that's what we'd like to do?
So two things. One is they don't have to, with National Grid, all of those units do not have to be on the same street. They're willing to do several different pilots in different locations.
Gotcha.
Secondly, they're asking for, $15.6 million, and that's all the money they'll have. If they had, if for some reason that site was less expensive, they could do more units. If for some reason it was like, say, one industrial plant with an enormous amount of heating and cooling, then maybe they'd only do one unit, if that makes sense. But they wouldn't do that because they'd, of course, want to have more units. That was simply an example.
Okay.
Yeah, Kara?
Thank you for staying with us so long. Two questions. One is I just want to kind of remember that what you said is this can be done without utility companies, like a private developer could do this on their own for a mixed use site. If and do you have any information you could send us on how that's been done in Massachusetts?
I don't have any ready information on that, but a lot of the colleges currently
Right.
In the state are either considering this or have already done this. I think I remember Smith College and a variety of other ones. So asking them if you're interested for good recommendations. There's also the geothermal Massachusetts Geothermal Association. And so you can certainly ask them, or Mass CEC has a list of geothermal installers, as well as average prices per tonnage. So using those sorts of resources would be great.
Great. And then my last follow-up question for tonight is, I just want to come back around to, it sounds like the application that's out for this area, they're looking for environmental justice communities, which we are not as a whole, but we do have 2 very limited districts. As this group is thinking about sites, how important do you think that is to make sure that we're at least including a population that's either that's income-based environmental justice community, or could it be just based on minority?
So I think they said both low income and EJ communities. So I think, if you have, for instance, low income, residents, housing authority, et cetera, that might work. And the other big criteria they had was leak prone infrastructure, of which Brookline has quite a lot. So I don't think Brookline is out of the running in any way at all for this.
Super helpful, thank you.
And again, I just, if anybody has any comments on all of this, I recommend sending them into the Department of Public Utilities on this to help make this the best pilot possible in terms of the way it's structured. It's not set in stone yet in any way. Nancy?
So one more question. So I was a little surprised to see National Grid's monthly rates so much higher, and also they seem to be paying for less. Is that right? I mean, are they going to assume, Eversource is assuming all of the infrastructure needs? Is National Grid also doing that, including in the buildings? And I understood Eversource was going to pay for the electric appliances that people need. Is that correct?
Yeah, Eversource is paying for the heat pumps in the building. They aren't paying for any other appliances in the building, and they aren't assuming that any other appliances will be switched out. National Grid is going to try and get, if they can, people to switch out other appliances, but they will be paying for the infrastructure in the street and for the heat pumps. But they do have a higher cost, fixed monthly cost.
Right. So what do you think is, do you have any idea of what you think is reasonable for a fixed monthly cost? Is this too high? Is it, I mean, if you wrote a letter, how would we base it? Just say, well, it's our gut that that's too high?
I would say, you should say what you want, but you might say that most low income people will not be able to afford such a cost. And if they seriously want low income on this, then they shouldn't put it that high. And that this seems to be a barrier to many different people, including market rate and high income people participating, because taking a risk on a new system and paying a high upfront cost and switching out all your appliances would be quite a big ask for most people. And they're going to really constrain their ability to pilot.
Right. Okay.
Does anyone else in the audience, any of the attendees have any questions or comments?
I don't see anyone with a raised hand, so.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, again, Audrey, thank you very, very much. It's certainly very thought-provoking.
That was excellent, Audrey. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.